Okay, last week when we were together, we ended on talking about the scientific method, which is everything the kids that are across the street in the junior or the middle school and the high school, this is what they're taught. They're taught the scientific method. Okay, if it can be repeatable, if it has the same result every single time, then it becomes a law, like the law of gravity. And this is how people understand things. Well, the issue is that the scientific method has never been set up to measure or test anything that is not material. And so it doesn't understand that. Basically, science always assumes everything has a natural cause, because by its very definition, it's the only thing it can address, natural cause. That's why if you look in a syllabus in a college, or maybe even in a high school, they call them the natural sciences, because there is no supernatural science. There's nothing else. It's a kind of a department of redundancy department, So, we are only taught science in our schools. Therefore, science becomes the litmus test that assesses everything that presents itself before us. And that's okay. That's fine. I'm not scared of science. I embrace it. I love it. I mean, come to my house. I have all kinds of things that have to do with science there, and I study it a lot. But if we are not educated in theology, then we can only examine truth claims with the only thing that we do have, and that would be science. And that's what society does. I'm saying this because of this reason. When you take the information that you have and you take it to someone who only understands natural science, you're not going to get through to them. So it's like I was talking about before, we have to understand the society that we're talking to. So we have to be careful about the terminology we use, because we can talk about anything and they will act like they know what we're talking about because they don't want to seem unknowledgeable or anything, so they'll go right along with you. But this is very evident. If you look in your notes, I'm talking about a guy. There's a guy by the name of Lord Rees of the Astronomy Royale, and he said of theoretical physicism and the cosmos, and this guy, the cosmologist Stephen Hawking, and this is what he said, and I don't know if I have this written down. I think I do. Quote, "I know Stephen Hawking well. He has written a number of scientific journals, but he knows little philosophy and no theology. And we shouldn't listen to a thing he says on any of those two topics." Why?
He doesn't know.
Because he doesn't know. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But if you would go to Stephen Hawking and say, when it comes to theology, you don't know what you're talking about, that would be an insult. It would be an insult to anybody, because what he is giving us is his assessment on what he thinks theology is. But because he has a title, because he has letters behind his name, he thinks that he understands theology because he's a very intelligent guy. We are intimidated, so we don't want to talk with him. But I put this in because we need to know. Somebody who is a theoretical physicist who knows him, Stephen Hawking, says he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I appreciate that. So we need to remember that all of us have been exposed to this line of academic education. And we understand it, and we have been affected by it to a certain degree. Not just those we're talking to, but we have been affected by it. So the Christian believes the information that is imparted to them, through the scriptures for various reasons. But at the same time, we also believe what science has revealed to us by the evidence that that it has given to us. Now, the question I have is, the statement I just made, is it true or false?
True.
Is it true sometimes? You want me to make the statement again?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to read what I have in my notes here so I don't say it wrong. The Christian believes in the information presented to us through the scriptures for a variety of reasons. Why do you believe it's true? And we could sit here for 20 minutes and discuss that, but you know why you believe what you believe. But at the same time, we believe in science because of the empirical evidence behind it. Right? Now, the statement I just made, is it a true statement?
Yes.
Is it true sometimes or all the time?
Depends on the person.
You. I'm talking about you. Is it true all the time or sometimes?
The question has two parts.
Yeah.
So you got to separate that. I believe the scripture all the time.
Okay.
The
What about
empirical
science when it has the empirical evidence behind it?
It's true until it changes.
Okay. Law of gravity.
I would believe that.
You got to believe it. Okay. And there's validity in what you're saying because part of science is evolution. You're going, no. Yes.
Well, I recall scientists putting bones together of a dinosaur. This is the way the dinosaur looked. And then recently they go, oh wait, his tail was up instead of down.
Right. Or they built an entire caveman out of a tooth, and then they later on found out, oh, this belonged to a pig. You know, so that was
Yeah.
from Nebraska.
Yes,
But they would
even
So
though
we got to be careful with that,
They do, they call it empirical evidence until it isn't, you know,
Yeah.
and
right?
but
Yeah, and a lot.
always.
Now, do you know why they did that, by the way? Just, you know, some of you might know and might not know. How were they able to build a man out of a tooth?
With their imaginations.
Well, there is deduction. If you take a tooth, and if it's of a, like for instance, let's say our teeth is as big as my fingernail. What if you have a tooth that's this big and it belongs in a human cranium?
Then the jaw's bigger and
The jaw has to be bigger, yes or no?
bigger.
Or you have a lot fewer teeth.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you have to have a bigger jaw. If you have a bigger jaw, you're going to look like Beavis or something with a underbite comes out to here, unless you see here. How many ever heard a preacher talk about Beavis? Okay, but if you're going to have, if your mandible is going to be that big, then your maxilla is going to have to be in a cranium of a certain size. Now, if you're going to have a cranium of a certain size, then you have to have a spine that's going to support the cranium.
Yeah.
Now, if a cranium is going to be of that size, then the shoulders and the arms, and you see what I'm talking about? But the assumption was it was a human tooth.
Yeah.
There was no evidence behind that. That's why it fell apart. Yeah.
I was going to say funding. You know, we have this
That's
fund.
true.
We've
So-
got to build something because we need the more money to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that opens up a whole new realm
Yes.
right there. Okay. So, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, because here's the question. At what point does, and this is where I'm talking about you and I'm not talking about people you're going to be talking to. I guess I could be, but right now I want to focus on you. At what point does our belief in science end and our belief in Scripture begins? And that is a question only you can answer, because that varies with people. There are people who they call theistic evolutionists. There's another big word. How many have ever heard of theistic evolution?
Yeah.
Okay, what that talks about is God used evolution to produce what we have today, and not substantiated in Scripture. I reject that. We've had people here in this church who are adamant about theistic evolution, and I rejected it from day one. So a better way to ask the question is this: at what point does our worldview, our opinions, our preferences, our interest end, and our belief in Scriptures begin? That's the big thing, because if we don't have that straight, then the people we're talking to, they're not going to know where we're coming from. So if I've used this example before. The guy from San Diego, David Jeremiah, used this example. I thought it was a great example. If I think the ice on the lake is too thin, I'm not stepping out on it. I'm not going to do it. But if I can see evidence that is thick enough to hold me up, if I see a car drive by and drive off the beach and onto the frozen lake and he drives right by, I'm going to think, well, then I'm not going to have a problem, and just step out onto the lake, okay, and fall in after he cracked the ice. Just kidding. But if I think it's thick enough, then I'm going to step out on it. So this is what Jesus is talking about when he said in Matthew 7:16, "You will know them by their fruits," and you can also assess that same way by what fruits they don't have, because a lot of times people will not witness because they really kind of don't believe. And we're going to get to why I'm saying that in just a second. But before we end this, and we're almost done with this part, is I want to go back and look at something Marilyn von Savant said. She said, religion cannot be proven intellectually. Most people who are not Christians have been trained to be natural empiricists, or knowledge based on experience derived from their senses. In other words, I got to see it to believe it. I got to touch it. I got to smell it. It's Thomas. Unless I see the handprints or the wound in his side, I'm not going to believe. That he became, at that point, he became a natural empiricist. And God said, no, you don't walk like that. You have to walk by faith, not by sight. So these people have to see it to believe it. So in a sense, they've only been trained to examine one side of the coin. That's why a lot of people have trouble even turning the coin over to see if there's another side. Christians, on the other hand, as long as they've been educated in a place where they've been given more than just pablum on a Sunday morning, if they've been educated, if they've been educated in theology, not spoon-fed milk from an edited form of the Bible, then they're going to be more intellectually well-rounded. I was talking to these two about that. You take people from over here, the secular generation, they've only been educated secularly. They've only been given the scientific method. They've only been educated in that realm. They don't know anything about this. In fact, this is what I'm going to be talking about on Sunday. They don't understand the Bible because they don't read it. They've read sections of it, and then they try to piece the pieces together of their own understanding, and they arrive at their own religion with their own God. And they think they know the Bible. They think they know the God of the Bible. And when you walk up to them and say, no, that's not who God is, they're going to be offended at you. So you have to be careful, because you understand you've been educated across the street, and you've also been educated on this side of the street. They haven't. So be careful on how you talk to them. Okay? Any questions on what we've been talking about as far as apologetics? That's actually kind of just an introduction to the course. But anybody have any questions about anything? No. Okay, I'm going to go through 5 questions. And these questions, I have to say, I've watched a lot of videos. I've been on YouTube. I've been even on TikTok. And I'm listening to what people are asking other people about Christianity and how they challenge them. And I'm not talking if it's a debate and they want to debate. I don't even go there. But if they're asking a sensible question, then I put these down into 5 categories, and I'd like to go through them with you. The first one is, did Jesus actually exist? I have heard more people say Jesus was a fictional character. He's not really there. Outside of the Bible, you don't see any writings of him. Oh yeah, there are. And there's more than what I have listed here. So I want to go through this. Okay? Did Jesus of Nazareth really exist? Here it is. There are at least 10 secular, non-Christian, non-Jewish, non-religious sources who have nothing to do with Christianity, and some of them are actually against Christianity, and they validate the existence. We're talking about the existence of Jesus. I'm not talking about what he did. We're talking about, did he exist? Because a lot of people don't even think. He's like Alice in Wonderland. Did Alice really exist? That's how they look at Jesus, because they look at the Bible like Aesop's fable, like Grimm's fairy tales. They really honestly do. They may not even realize that they do. So let's go through 10 of these. One, you've already heard us talk about him. Josephus. Josephus is a Roman historian. He's not Jewish, he's a Roman historian. And he mentions Jesus twice in his 20-volume, the name now escapes me, it'll come to me, Antiquities. He has a series called Antiquities, and he mentions Jesus twice. And he has nothing, he's not even mentioned in the Bible. Josephus, that is. Yes?
When was Josephus alive? He was not that far after.
No, not that, no. No, he was first century. He was in the first century. I should have put the years down, but I didn't do that. Here's another one, Tacitus. Now, I will tell you this. Everybody I'm going to talk to is within 120 years of the resurrection. Okay? Do you know who the president was 120 years ago? Thomas Jefferson. But still, how much do we know about Thomas Jefferson? Nobody questions anything about him. And if there's something wrong, there are people who are saying all kinds of different things about Thomas Jefferson, and they're going, really? Where's that at in history? Where did you find that? Where's your source on that? And they challenge what they're saying. They could have done it here. But again, these guys, they're not substantiating Jesus. They're not giving him credit. They're just saying he's there. He was a real person. The next one is Tacitus. He, again, like Josephus, was a Roman historian. He was a senator in Rome. And he mentions the crucifixion of Jesus. Very interesting. And there's going to be other things you're going to hear about these guys that may cause your eyebrows to raise. Another guy, Pliny the Younger. He was a lawyer, and like Tacitus, who held a Roman position, he was a governor. Pliny the Younger, he talks about songs about Jesus. So people wrote songs about Jesus of Nazareth, and he talks about those. Pliny the Younger wrote a lot of history. Then there was another guy, Phlegon, again, a Roman historian. Listen to this. He mentions the darkness at the crucifixion. Now that's a miracle. And this guy is secular. He is not a Christian. He is not a Jew. And he talks about the darkness that happened at the crucifixion. That should open a few eyes. But not like Thales, who is a Roman historian. He not only mentions the darkness, but he mentions the earthquake. When Jesus died, there was an earthquake. And he talks about that. Suetonius, another Roman historian. He actually refers to Jesus as the Mashiach. He calls Jesus, he was called the Christ. So he identifies it. You put the Christ and Jesus in the same sentence. And that's what Thales did. Suetonius, another Roman historian. That's the guy I said. Never mind. He's talked to Jesus as the Christ. Lucian. He is a critic. He was against Christianity. And he talks about Jesus sarcastically, makes fun of him, he mocks him. But how can you mock people that don't exist? That's very important. Lucian. Now here's the thing. You don't have to remember all these guys' names. But if someone ever asks you, you say, oh yeah, there are at least minimum of 10 people who have nothing to do with religion in any way, shape, or form, who attest to the fact that Jesus existed. Now, if they ask you, who are that? Just say, I'm sorry, I left my library at home. I didn't think anybody's going to ask me about this today. I didn't have the information with me. But if you don't believe me, check it out. Go get on the internet, type it up. You'll see these 10 people. Celsus, another critic of Christianity. He refused to believe the claims about Jesus. You say, doesn't that refute it? No, because the claims that were made about Jesus, there had to be a Jesus for there to be claims, and he rejected it. He said, no, I don't believe that Jesus did those things. But he admits that he existed. And the last two is Serapion. He's a Jewish philosopher. He said he identified Jesus as a wise king, quote unquote. A wise king. And the last one, we talked about this last week, the Talmud, remember? The oral tradition about Jesus. They actually mentioned Jesus in the Talmud, and they said, oh yeah, he was a magician. Okay, they got him wrong, but they still said he existed, right? So not only do they attest to the existence of Jesus, but they identify him as being considered as the Christ, and their writings verify to the letter what Scripture has already said about him. They're verifying it. So not only that, but as I said earlier, we have a reliable set of documents. They're written by eyewitnesses during the life of other eyewitnesses. So why didn't anyone come forward and dispute this? Nobody has. There is absolutely zero writings. If there was, you would have been hearing about it by now. But no one refuted anything that had to do with any of this, including the resurrection. So again, I don't expect you to remember all 10 of these guys. I don't expect you to remember what they said. My objective is to give you assurance that, yeah, there are people out there. There's lots of people out there, and these are just the prominent people. From what I understand, there's well over 120 different secular writings that use Jesus of Nazareth, and they refer to him. But these are the top 10 that hold weight, that actually have historical writings behind them. So the first point is this. Now you know the answer is yes, there is a verified evidence of Jesus' existence. But my second point is this. They were not privileged to the information that you were able to have. But now they have it because you've given it to them. I don't even think, Jesus, this mystical, he's not mystical. There are secular writings, even just a casual looking historically, and you'll find that Jesus actually existed. Try it. I'll stand behind it. I'll buy you dinner, because it's a sure bet. They say there is no such thing as a sure bet. But yeah, I'll buy you dinner if you can't find it. But there are people out there, undisputed, that mention Jesus of Nazareth. So now, here's the thing. Now that they have this information, like you, they're going to be responsible for it. Deborah was just talking about Romans 1:18. God made it evident to them, and you were part of that evidence. What is apologetics? To be able to defend your faith. I believe that Jesus existed. Why? Because the Bible says so. Okay, well that's true, it does. But I also know of other reasons why I believe in Jesus, because these other people talked about him. And see, when you know these things, it also, Hebrews 11:1, it increases your faith, because you become more educated as far as what the Bible is talking about, because the Bible now has become even more substantiated, even outside of itself. Okay, questions, because that's a short one. We got 20 minutes left, so I want to get to the next one. Any questions about the existence of Jesus? I'm not talking about what he did, I'm just talking about, does he exist? Nothing? All right, second one. This is going to be harder. Does God exist? Why would this be harder?
No physical appearance.
Anybody ever hear anybody ever hear God talk? Moses did. There are other prophets that heard the voice of God, but they've been dead thousands of years, and it just sounds like a mystical story. We don't hear him today, but we see the words of Jesus. We understand what he was a physical person. So this is going to be a little harder. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on this. We're just going to kind of get into this a little bit tonight. So does God exist? Well, there are 3 responses to this question, and you have to figure out which one of the 3 is the direction you're going to go. 1, there are agnostics. What does agnostic mean? What does gnostic mean? Anybody know what Gnostic?
Without knowledge.
Knowledge, to know something. That's where the word know comes from. So you put the negative particle in front of it, it negates the word. It literally, to be agnostic literally means to not know. So it doesn't mean you're uneducated. It just means, do you believe in Bigfoot? Well, I'm an agnostic. I can't verify if he does or doesn't exist. I don't know. So I'm an agnostic when it comes to Bigfoot. Aliens, I've never seen one, so I can't say one way or the other. I don't think so, but I would have to be an agnostic on that. So people are an agnostic if they can't determine whether they believe in God's existence, if they can't put both feet on the floor and say, no, he doesn't exist. Now here's the second one. I'm bringing this up because you need to know about this. Most people that you are going to be witnessing to, are you ready? How many of you are paying attention? Most people that you're going to be talking to are going to be in category number 2. They think they're Christians. They think they are. And that is so important. They believe, but they believe passively. Now, you know what I mean by that? They're a passive Christian. In other words, they don't do anything. It's like a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian that doesn't vote. They're passive. They're not of any use. They just take up space. Okay? Many of these people that you're going to be talking to were taught to believe. They're brought up in a Christian home, and I'm using the word Christian loosely here. Maybe they're brought up in a church, and although they're agnostic, they've convinced themselves that they are Christians. They have convinced, and if you challenge them, they are going to be very, very upset with you. They're going to get mad at you. How dare you challenge my faith? How dare you? Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm on a plane and someone sits next to me and said, can I spend the next 10 minutes or so and then after 10 minutes I won't bug you anymore. But I'd like to talk to you about someone named Jesus. That would be so cool. I would shake their hand and say, I'm going to buy you a Coke, or something, just good for you. I'm not going to be upset at them. They're doing what they should be doing. But most people get upset. Their teaching in either the home or in their church was very simple. It was very elementary at best, and probably, honestly, just plain wrong. So their instruction was basically incorrect, or they really haven't learned. They've read sections of the Bible. They know John 3:16 and built their entire theology around that, and they don't even know what love means biblically. So they're basically incorrect. So these people, they make absolutely no effort to substantiate their decision to believe. They just call themselves Christian. They don't think it's worth the effort to be a Christian. They won't even admit that to themselves, but they don't think that they can do it, or they have to, because I don't have time. I'm just too busy for this kind of a thing. And they honestly believe that. But someone was talking to me the other day, and they said, really, if you think about it, time doesn't have anything to do with it. The number one reason why people say they don't have time to do something is because it's too far down their priority list, and all the other things they want to do go before it, and they run out of time. It's just like with our finances. We don't give to God because, hey, I spent everything I wanted, and I got all my bills paid off, and did all this other stuff, and all I have is this, and I guess I can give this to God. And that's how that goes, and that's how a lot of times people's belief system goes. Okay, so there's the first two, and like I said, the vast majority is going to be the second category. And with those, you're not really going to be in an argument with them, because they do have an understanding and a sensitivity to God. But then there are those who make a stand that, in their opinion, God does not exist. Now, I want you to write this down. I think I only gave you one line. I don't know why I only gave you one line. But there is a term I want you to write down. You don't have to remember the term. In fact, if you want, you can just write down the definition. But there is a term that I have in my head when I talk to certain people, and they can be what is called an existential nihilist. An existential nihilist. If you want to write that down, it's EXISTENTIAL, and the word nihilist is NIHILIST. Existential nihilist. And what that literally means is this: life is meaningless, it has no purpose, and there is no right or wrong. Now, I have been a Christian for 60 years, 61 years. I have come across 2 of these, and I witness a lot. So I'm just telling you, you need to know that they're out there. They may think that they are that way, but they're not. They don't even live that way, okay? These kind of people, you're not really going to be able to converse with. They're just going to be argumentative, okay? They don't even agree with what they say they believe, okay? They'll be the first one to say, well, that's not fair. Well, how can you be an existential nihilist and think that there's a concept of fair? If there's no such thing as right or wrong, where does fair come from? But they'll use that all the time. You know, they'll say, well, that's not even normal. What's normal? If you're a nihilist, what's normal? How can you say there's normal? So they don't even believe it themselves. So there's no such thing as anything ethical in any way, shape, or form. That's why you can't talk to them. Because what does it take? What does it take? Pop quiz. What does it take? One of the first things you have to understand when you start talking to a person. In order for you to have a conversation with them, I'll give you a hint. Amos 3:3.
You have to agree.
You have to agree. How can 2 people walk down the road unless they agree? You have to find a point to where you can come together. An existential nihilist thinks there's nothing. There is no normal. There is no right. There is no wrong. Then there's nothing you can talk about. You can't even begin anywhere. So I don't even waste their time. Or my time, for that matter. Now, I do want you to, how much time do I have? I got 10 minutes. We do have time for this, because I want you to hear this. And this is why you can't speak or spend any time to someone who acts like they're an existential nihilist, because they're not one. They just think it's cool to be that way, and they're argumentative. And so you just can't spend time with these kind of people. But this is if you can. If you talk to category number 1, who is an agnostic, people that aren't sure if they're a Christian or not. Or number 2, people, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Well, you just can't take them, because you got it like Jesus said. You know, you'll know them by their fruits. You'll know them by the things they talk about. You'll know them by how they respond to things, and what their emphasis is in their life, and what their purpose is in life, what their interests are, and that bears fruit. And so you can say, okay, I'm concerned about this. I'm not going to say they're going to burn in hell because of what I'm seeing, but I'm seeing evidence of it, so I'm going to give them the truth, and I'm going to see how they respond to it. You're not telling them they're going to burn. You're just going to be careful. Be careful to make sure they're not. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so the question that we really have to begin with, like I said, you know, Amos 3:3, you know, how can 2 people walk down a road unless they're agreed, is we try to determine the starting point. Okay, what caused a starting point? Okay, and this is, again, this is talking to one of the 3 categories. The subject we're talking about right now is, does God exist? Does God exist? Well, okay, then the question that we have to ask ourselves is there a starting point where we can agree that we need to start here? If you talk to a scientist, if you were before 1960, actually before 1962, I think, maybe 64, I can't remember. But back then, before that time, Einstein believed this, Hubble believed this, everybody believed that the universe is eternal. It's just always been here. It's just always been here. Well, we don't have a starting point. How can you have a starting point to something that's eternal? Right? There is no starting point. It's always been here. Like God. What's the starting point of God? He doesn't have one, because He is eternal. So if we're going to talk about God, then there has to be some place where we can arrive from. So we look at what God has done. So we have to say, okay, there has to be a starting point. If you talk to it took a while for this to catch on, but in the 21st century, it's going to be extremely difficult to find anyone who knows what they're talking about, that has to do with science, who will not agree with you that there was a starting point. Now, how do we know this? Does anybody have any idea of how we know that there was a starting point in the things that we experience. Does anybody know anything about this? I'll give you just one example. I talked about Hubble, for instance. Hubble told Einstein, he said, I need you to come to, right over here as a matter of fact, what's the
Palomar?
not Palomar, it's San Gorgonio Mountains up here. The Griffiths Observatory. So he went to the Griffiths Observatory and he said, I want you to see something. And when he showed Einstein this, Einstein just threw everything up in the air and he said, okay, there's no disputing it. What he saw is that everything is moving. You've heard of the expansion of the universe? Yes? That's what Hubble saw. He saw the red light. Red light is the last light in the spectrum, which shows that things are moving away. The only thing you can see is the red light. So everything is moving away. They're moving away from each other. So if that happened, then the universe is expanding into areas that we're completely unaware of, but it's moving away from us in all directions. So if that happened, then turn the clock back. If it's moving away, then yesterday they were a little closer than it was today. What about 100 years ago? What about 10,000 years ago? You see what I'm talking about? And if you pull it back, isn't it interesting that it proves that it's somewhere between 7 or 8,000 years that this stuff converged. That's what a lot of people are saying. And that was substantiate Genesis, but I'm not going to go that. I'm not going to go there. But what I'm saying is that everything converged and came to a point. That's a starting point. There's not a scientist out there that will refute that. Well, I can't say that. There are some who are holdouts from the 60s, and they'll say that, or they just don't want to, because they know where we're going if we talk about that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to determine what caused the starting point. What caused that? Whatever caused it had to be in existence. Now listen to what I'm saying. It had to be in existence prior to the starting point of space, because before everything exploded there was no space. So there was no matter, right? And if there's no space and there's no matter, then there's no time. So, and scientists are in absolute agreement about this. Prior to the starting point of space, time, and matter, there had to be a cause that brought all this to be. So that cause cannot be, by definition, space, time, or matter. Why?
Because they were created from that.
Yeah, it happened after the cause brought it into being. So it has to be separate from that. And again, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any scientist that's going to refute that. So it had to be prior to the existence of space, time, and matter. So this cause then has to be outside the realm of space, outside the realm of time, and it can't be consisting of matter. And it has to have the capacity to cause it. This is where you get the term the uncaused cause. I know that sounds weird. So this cause then would also have to have the intellect to initiate that, to have it happen, but also to sustain space, time, and matter. It has to have that ability to keep it going. In other words, inanimate cannot make decisions. You understand what I'm saying when I say that? I know I'm just throwing things out there. But inanimate cannot make decisions, right? Like, take for instance, I brought this with me. Okay, if you take this, it's just a little ball, right? Little ball bearing. And if you take it and you drop it, then that's gravity. Can gravity decide at one point, I'm not going to work? I'm going to decide, no, you know what? It's going to be different. This time when I drop it, it's not going to fall. Can it do that? No. It is when you let it go, it'll fall. Every single solitary time. So it it is outside of this, and it doesn't have the capacity to warp or to even think about causing anything to happen outside of this constant capacity to always be able to act in a certain way. Okay, so it has to be. It cannot make a decision to modify itself. Only something that is alive can do that, right? So it cannot alter, it cannot change itself. It takes intellect to choose, in this case, to create. Now, I don't know, I can't remember what I have in your notes, but listen to this. Again, I'm going to talk to you about Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking explains this. Now listen to this very carefully. If the expansion rate of the universe, remember I told you that there was an explosion, they call it the Big Bang, because they're very creative in their terminology. So they had this Big Bang, and now things are still moving out. We can see that there's a myriad of tests that they have proven. There's the after effects of the explosion, there's the radiation, there's the sound, there's all the different things that would have happened if the explosion did, and they've tested it, and surprise, all the evidence is there of an explosion. So what caused the explosion? And what exploded? People are trying to figure that out. But Stephen Hawking said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was off, and I'm quoting, by 1 part in 1,000 billion. Do you know how much that is? 1 part in 1,000 billion. 1 second after the Big Bang happened, the universe would have collapsed upon itself, and it would have never continued in any state at all. In other words, no planets, no nothing. It just would have been absolute chaos. No life, no nothing. And this is him. Now here's the thing. And I'm going to ask you, I want you to think about this for a minute, and then we're done. It is impossible to make any evolutionary argument for the account of the expansion rate. I'm going to say that again, because I need you to think about this. This is why I'm not telling you what to think. I want you to think on your own. It would be impossible to make any evolutionary argument on it that accounts for the expansion rate. Why would that be a true statement? I talked to you. Do you remember why? What is the one thing you need for evolution? What is the only requirement you need for evolution?
Time.
You need time. Without time, can you have evolution? No. And Stephen Hawking just said this took place 1 second after the Big Bang. You need a lot more than 1 second. Do you see how the concept of evolution falls apart when you look at things logically, even using their own words? And at this point, if you're using the terminology that I have, notice I haven't said anything about God. All I've said was the word cause. They know what you're getting at. You know, I haven't determined that cause to be God, but everybody you're going to be talking to knows what you're talking about, and they're going to be defensive on that. Okay, so our objective is to establish Amos 3:3. You have to establish where we can start from. If they can say, yes, there was an explosion. Yes, there was a point in time where things blew up. Okay, now we can say, okay, what caused that? And if it did explode, these are the evidences and these are the scientific explanations of the things that we're empirically witnessing, which substantiates the following. And most people haven't taken a moment